Hey everybody, how you doing? It's been a little bit, but I hope not too long. I have to discuss this time a little bit of an epiphany I had. And these things come in unusual ways sometimes. In my case, I'm reminded of Spaulding Grey, the monologuist writer who used to talk about perfect moments, and you couldn't predict them. It's whenever, it's kismet. It's when everything just comes together. But you can't create them. You can't make them happen. They sort of happen, and if you're lucky enough, you recognize that while they're happening, that they're happening. He used to talk about it, and it's very, it was kind of a funny idea, but it stuck with me because they happen. And again, they're rare. Where a moment of clarity, right? You have this point where you a bunch of things, and sometimes it comes, in this case, like it did in this case, very disparate sources. All these different things came together to help me see the ground differently, see the future differently, see my relation to it differently. So what am I talking about? Well, I'll start throwing some ideas at you, and I think these as it goes, you go, what, wait, and now we're talking, what? It'll coalesce, so stick with me, because I think it'll make sense. Let's start with the nature of our discourse. Is a problem I have wrestled with, for years, and because I think it's a mess. And how to go about it, how to be successful at it in a time where it's become particularly difficult. Maybe not so much in our day-to-day interactions, but certainly on our online interactions. And I know there'll be a reaction of some, they'll say, well, that doesn't matter. The online stuff that doesn't. I'd actually postulate the opposite. What you're getting in person isn't the real. You're much more likely to get real from people who can hide behind a nom de guerre. One of the places the internet first screwed it up was that no one put their name to things, but which has allowed this environment, this ecosystem to happen. And there is virtually nothing you can say from virtually any constituency without getting yourself in incredible trouble with somebody in another constituency. Well, that's the fractured nature of our politics. I know, but there's a couple aspects of this. And to get to the heart of it, I think one of the things that gets to the heart of it is knowing where you fit. And those are things no one wants to recognize. And what I mean is, take a look in the mirror. I'll do it, for example. I'm in my 50s and I'm a white guy. I'm not a boomer. I'm the next group down. So there's assumptions made because of age, because of generation. And there are assumptions made. I'm an ordinary white guy. What can I say about all sorts of issues of which I am not necessarily a member of those constituencies? So if you have an opinion about anything outside, it's you're a bigot, you're right, you're a troglodyte, you're all that. Now this might seem like I'm going for some sort of right-wing talking point. I'm not. What I'm saying is although there's definitely something unfair about that, it's also true that I'm not the right guy. I'm not the right messenger. No matter what my opinions are, I'm probably not the right messenger to talk about issues when I'm not part of the constituency. Right? If I start talking race relations, well, I've never really walked those shoes of someone who's in a minority and is, has had to deal with what people of color have to deal with. If I talk LGBTQ, matter them, right? I could be an ally, all right? And part of being a good ally is being empathetic, but I can't really be the avatar, the person to, even when I'm supportive or even when I'm critical or questioning an idea, in some ways I'm the wrong guy to be doing that. While that's true, there's a good side to it. The good side being people can be allies. There are, if you are of if you come from a good place, from a pure place, your intentions are right, those people are important for cause because you're not. Now there's the advantage, right? The converse of, well, you can't speak to this, you're not part of the constituency is, but if you're in favor of the ideals of that constituency, you have some understanding, even if you're not wholly part of it, you get it enough to be able to be an ally, then it's I think very good for me, but also very good for those constituencies to have someone on board. So that's not necessarily a terrible thing. But I guess my point is that you could be the most reasonable person imaginable. And somebody out there, you ain't going to make it. You're not going to get by with that crowd, no matter what. Now let's break that down. There's no doubt some of that is absolutely sincere. There are folks who you are whatever you are. That's a bad thing because you don't go with their particular view exactly the way they go. Okay, so you can't pass the test. There's a lot of purity stuff. So there are people out there who definitely, absolutely feel that way. Okay. There's also, though, a ton of it online that are just flat out gaslighting you to a degree, right? So much of the outrage, some of the outrage is real. Some of the outrage isn't. There's trolling going on. I just got introduced to, I'm not ready to sit there and say this is my new hero or something, but I recently got introduced to Matt Dillahunty, who is a atheist, secular humanist like me. And I found him to be very, very bright guy. And I think a lot of the reason why is because he was so calm and was able to explain these things and his views in a very calm way. It was never hyperventilating. Now, maybe he gets that way, and maybe I just haven't seen enough of his stuff to know where he's at. But he certainly was an excellent explainer of his own views. And he was talking about, and it gets very subtle, the nature of our discourse, the nature of our debate. Now, that gets a little interesting too, because you may be aware of this or may not, but there is a whole world of public intellectuals, and they have debates, conferences and discussions, and two guys on a stage in chairs, perhaps a little table between them with some ice water. And they're going to hit the major issues. And there's a whole, right, there's a subculture for everything, right? Well, there's a debate subculture. And I don't like subcultures because I think they get extremely pedantic. Whichever subculture, I'm a musician, right? So there's a whole progressive rock subculture, and they all try to outdo each other about what is pure. There's an ambient music subculture. There's certainly a jazz subculture. There's a music theory police subculture. They all end up, the very thing that draws you to them, the fact that they want to go deep into the weeds, is why they get into trouble, because they go so deep in the weeds. And debate subculture has that issue too. They get so into what they're into that they argue as much about arguing as actually talking about the points that supposedly we were all right. So it becomes more about the method of debate, and so that gets a little Okay, so I'm trying to not go there, but find the area where there is actual value to pull from that. And one of the things that I heard Dillahunty talking about is knowing when, knowing early. And I think particularly this is particularly important for people on the left, because people on the left come to an argument and say, I am of pure heart. We will all sit at the round table, and we will go to the agora, and we shall all discuss, because we're all, we're going back to Socrates, or we're going to be, we're all students of Plato, whatever it's going to be, but we're going to, with this pure heart, we shall all, it assumes that other people, of course, are equally making, arguments in good faith. And man, most of the time they are not. And I think you got to recognize that early. Now, does that mean that there's a quick cancellation and that's the answer? Don't feed the trolls. We've known that forever. Yeah. But here's the thing. If you just leave, if you won't make the argument, if you won't deal with them on any level, then the problem is you have ceded the field to the enemy, and the enemy wins the day. You've given them all the oxygen because you simply won't be there. That's not the answer. The answer, then engage. Well, then if you engage, then you're also uplifting an argument that should, do you really need to have an argument with people who are, fascist sympathizers, who have no interest, it's all straw man stuff, right? It's misdirection, it's whataboutism, and in that, all they need to do to be successful is dilute things enough and get things confused enough so that your message isn't covered, then they win. They have a much lower threshold for being successful. They don't need to win any arguments. They just need to make people confused enough so that they don't know what the hell's going on anymore. Then they could claim victory. So you don't want to engage like that either. Right? So is there an answer here? In those situations, all right, we're talking very specifically now about those situations. In those situations, I think you've got to be, you could debate their ideas, but you don't have to debate it with them. You don't have to go talk with them and talk about them online. You could go off on your own thing, cite them accurately, and be sure to be able to get your message across so that your message doesn't get diluted, but you're still addressing the material. And from what I could see, I was listening to Dillahunty talk about this, going on to these debates, where previously he would go in, apparently, he would go in and pretty much unprepared, not know that much about his opponent and not want to know much about the opponent. Just go in, we're going to go in, we're going to talk. Very pure of heart and so forth. But sometimes he was walking into a trap. And so he ended up, once he realized this, on a few occasions, he just quit the debate because he realized he was going in there to have a debate. They were going in there to play games at his expense. And so he wouldn't, okay, that's good. But so now because the sands underneath his feet have shifted, he's had to adjust. Good. That's good. Right? So he's made the tactical decision to have a little bit of knowledge about who he's talking about. And sometimes he's going to say no, that he's just not going to treat with them. Which strikes me as absolutely fair. And I think on the left, we need to be doing more of that. It's a way of enforcing previous norms and previous standards and getting them back in the culture again. Knowing a little bit more about debate, perhaps, but also saying, okay, I'll talk about the subject matter, but I'm not going to talk about the subject matter with you because you don't play the game right. You are not coming at this with good faith. You're coming at it with an agenda, and you're coming at it to play games. Therefore, we'll talk about the subject, but we're not going to talk about the subject with the person who can't behave in a civilized way. It's a way of uplifting a bit of civilization. Puts a little bit more order into it, and it really undercuts the bad faith folks, which obviously we need more of, right? No one's in favor of gatekeeperism, right? There used to be a lot of gatekeeperism. People were like, I want to tear that down. Okay, we have torn it down. There's not much left of that. And what's left of it is odious and awful. Okay. But we've gone the other way. Now it's a free-for-all. Obviously, that can't be the answer either. Now, look, I'm not saying the answer to everything is bell curves, because it's not, okay? But sometimes it is. And gatekeeperism isn't a great thing, and the lack of it isn't a good thing. But increasingly having a place where there are some rules, and we have to enforce them, right? There are no rules if they're not enforced. We only have rules if someone's going to enforce them. Then no one's enforcing them, then there are no rules. Right? We see enough of that going on. Follow our justice system. And we've got all the rules. You enforce them? No. Well, then there's no rules. Got to enforce the rules. That's a big part of what I wanted to talk about today. All right, but there are some other things that happened in my life that put a spin on this idea of deciding for yourself how it is you're going to interact with the world, as opposed to letting the world dictate the terms. I think that's so much of what's going on. And now I'm going to shift gears a little bit, because I'm going to really start talking about a musical person like me, or now I guess YouTube me, trying to interact with the world. And this is going to be a curveball, okay? I think you'll see the thread. Over the holidays, I decided to read the Three Musketeers. Now, just as an aside, the Three Musketeers is one of my favorite old books. It's very light. This is not heavy reading. It's very light reading. Dumas was wonderful. I'm of French extraction. I love all the Frenchness. I do love it. I must have read it a million times. But it's an old pair of blue jeans. It's comfy. And at that time of year, right, when you go through the holidays all like that, you sort of indulge in those sort of things anyhow. And I'm not sure what the impetus was, but I started reading it again. And I flew through it. And it was great. I think there was a new translation. And I sometimes yes, this is how deep in the weeds I get on this. I compare translations to see choice of words and so forth. Anyway, so I read this translation. I had a blast with it. And I realized that the guy who had translated that had also unearthed a recent, recently, well, I guess it's been around, but no one had published it, was that Dumas had written, Dumas wrote a ton of stuff. He wrote a whole, after he wrote Three Musketeers, there was a sequel to that 20 years later, and then he wrote the rest of the Musketeers' lives. He wrote their whole life story till all of them died. The third volume of that trilogy is so long that it's usually broken up into 3 enormous novels, or sometimes even 5. Okay, so you could read that whole thing. And I have. I, at one point, said I'm going to read it all, and it gets unbelievably dry as it goes on. Really hard. The good stuff is that first volume, and the second volume is great. I don't think he needed to do more after that. I think the story's done, but that's okay. The point is that recently unearthed has been that he tackled the original period of history again later on. Except he didn't include the Musketeers in it. He just talked about the famous personages. Now, the first Three Musketeers happens in the 1620s. Our hero's a young man who goes to Paris, and they start to talk about how it's a historical, right? It's a historical novel, so a lot of the characters are real people. The captain of the Musketeers was a real guy. They talked about the king, they talked about the queen, and they talked about Cardinal Richelieu, who really ran everything because the king was basically an incompetent. And even the king sort of got at a clue that he was incompetent and let Richelieu sort of run everything. And in the course of that novel, the Musketeers are for the king and the queen. The queen, was she was Anne of Austria, but she was actually from Spain. Now we're getting into deep, royal families of Renaissance of France. I mean, good Lord, it's very complicated. But the queen was not a friend of the king. He and the king didn't get along. They never got along. They didn't make a lot of sense. It was an arranged marriage. So she was always intriguing and doing all sorts of things. The cardinal was against her. The king essentially being protected by the cardinal. So there was this tension going on to the degree that the Musketeers either found themselves, you either were with the king or with the idea of royalty, or you were the idea of, the cardinal was going to run the country. And in that version of the book, the Musketeers are like, look, we know that royalty they aren't perfect people by any, but the idea of a benevolent royalty, this sort of chivalric belief, we want to believe in that. So they're on that side, and they're sort of against the cardinal. The cardinal's painted as the big bad guy. In this unearthed book, instead of taking that talking about it years later, no, he picked up right where the end of the Three Musketeers left off, except he took the Musketeers out of it and just kept writing about the king and the cardinal and Anne of Austria, the wife, and the Queen of England, the Queen of France, I'm sorry. And we're going to deal with that. It was never finished, so you could read this thing and it ends abruptly. So I read Three Musketeers, then I read this thing, which is called, let me remember what it's called, The Red Sphinx, I think, something like that. Which is considered, it's really for people, you have to be a real fan to read this thing, because again, it doesn't have an end. There was a short story they tag at the end. They think they sort of tells the end of the story. Okay. But it's interesting to read. All right, so I read through that, and then I want to read the actual sequel to Three Musketeers, which I read that too. And that spurred me to want to keep reading about the actual history. One of the things about those books is that there are so many people, there are so many characters, it's very hard to keep in mind who all of these people were. There's all these different folks. They're all, most of them, all aristocrats of the time. And trying to keep track of all of them. So I've been reading histories on each of these individuals. Who were they really? How close did Dumas come in describing them? Because obviously there was some, it's work of fiction and he's having fun with, okay. But he didn't stray actually that far. You start to read the actual histories of people and you go, okay, that's why Dumas, not that that's the history, but there is a very obvious through line from what these people actually were and how they are painted by Dumas. He didn't stretch things incredulously. You might have a different opinion of them, but okay. But here's the thing. There's the first book, we talk about this in his second full novel, where he speaks about things 20 years after the events of the Three Musketeers, and now the Musketeers have all gone to separate things and part of their lives. They find themselves coming together. There was an historic event at that time called the Fronde. The Fronde was precursor to the French Revolution, except it's happening like 1648 or something, okay? So it's 150, 100, and, whatever it is, 135, 130. It's 140, close to that, years before the French Revolution is actually going to happen. But there is a split. Cardinal Richelieu is now gone. Louis XIV is born, but he's not yet in charge. He's a 9-year-old kid or something. The mother is still there. Louis XIII died. The mother, Anne of Austria, is there. She's sort of running the country, and she is with the protege of Cardinal Richelieu, was Cardinal Mazarin, who was an Italian guy, and he is despised by a lot of the French because he's not French. And the French are too crazy about her because she's Spanish. So there's nobody French actually running the country. And there was a point where the the aristocracy there decided we're going to gang up and we're going to try to change things. And there was, for a period of time in Paris and around France, a series of there was civil unrest. People in the streets. People, the queen left with the king, left town at one point, got chased out of Paris because they eventually, they bought off enough people and they were able to settle the dispute. And the story takes place during these period of time. And so why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you this, right? The wonderful thing about reading history, and the hard history as well as the fictionalized history, but the wonderful thing about history is that it elucidates the past, but it really elucidates the present. People haven't changed, right? There is nothing that has happened that we. And one of the big takeaways, and the thing that I find fascinating, why I'm reading it, about all of this French history and all of these the Duc de this and Lady de Longueville and Madame de Chevreuse and all of these folks, is there is a sort of an elite there, and they are all scheming against each other. It's all self-interest. And they'll tell themselves anything. And they'll make a deal with one and then screw them over the next day. Everyone is screwing everybody all the time. And it's clearly an unsustainable way to go about anything, but hey, they don't give a shit as long as it helps them. So all of that is sort of going on. And it is remarkably like what goes on in our society today. It's amazing. When you get into something that granular, you certainly see what we see with everybody fighting everybody about everything that we see these days. So, and it became very confusing, right? And how do you take do you take a side? You're assumed to be something that you're not. People trying to, they go, no, you're a Frondist. Are you with Mazarin? No, I'm with, some would say, I'm with the king. Which is to say they were the Frondists, because the Frondists were like, let's let the king just rule and be the king when he's ready and get rid of. So there are all these different layers of what you meant about where you were at. And that, there was a lot of subtlety, a lot of granular, and that made it hard to pin people down. And I don't think that's bad. I think it was more accurate to understand all of that granularity, if you will, understanding all those differences. And I think there's a lot of that to be understood now. We do have a tendency to, because it makes it easier, right? To eventually, yes, people have to choose a side. We're going to have an election this year. People are going to have to choose a side. And, if you're on no matter what your reason why, if you're on the side that eventually says, yes, I believe in authoritarianism and I like strongmen, you're really never going to get a pass for that. Whereas I think if you're the other side, you could sit there and go, yes, I've got some issues with this and this and this and this, but good Lord, I cannot possibly be for that, therefore. And that's reasonable. That's much more reasonable and much more, you can be much more easily forgiven because we don't have great candidates, right? So I got a lot out of doing that reading. And one of the things is, since you can't please everybody, and now this gets back to me musically, I think I've spent a lot of my life, like I think a lot of musicians have, trying to please a cognoscenti that essentially can't be pleased and doesn't even believe in the same stuff as you believe in. They're really, it's really all about them having a degree of control and securing their position. You know, whether it's the jazz police or the name one of them. It's certainly not about creativity. There's the chops police. There's that out there. The people who are all about every technique known to man. And you get to a point, I think, I've probably gotten to this point before, but I don't know if I've ever gotten to this point this strongly. You go, well, it's way too late to have gotten to this point now, Dave. You know what? I don't think so. Increasingly, I just sort of recognizing the folly of being that kind of follower. You've got to chart your own path. And thinking that you're ever going to get a particular crowd on board, no, you can't chase that. You just have to do you and let them chase you. It's sort of the same as relationships, right? Have you ever seen the Morgan Freeman thing where someone said, do you chase women? And he said, no, I let them chase me, because he made himself to a degree not so available. Obviously, we're talking about, cis relationships in this case, yeah. But that's sort of, I think, just being aware of that. If you, again, it's going back to, you make an argument and you come, hat in hand, and we're all going to sit at the round table. You're setting yourself up to be screwed over, because the people that you're dealing with don't have your best interests at heart in the first place. I think there's so much of that in the musical world where we're very naive, and we think if it's based somehow, things are based on, on merit or on talent. And, you look at any of this, you realize, no, it never has been. It never is, and it never has been. And the great world has generally gotten it wrong. Just today, what is it? Academy Award nominations, right? And Gerwig and sorry, I'm forgetting her name, lead actress, Robbie, and don't get nominated for anything. The picture gets nominated for Best Picture. They don't get nominated for anything. And Gosling is like, who's got nominated? So there, and you sit there and go, wow, that's such an injustice. Yeah, but when has there ever been justice? That scene, for whatever reason, doesn't like her. I don't want to see, polarize them, and if I'm her, I hope she doesn't care. It's one of those things. The Grammys are going to come up. I've always said this about the Grammys. You win one, it's going to be on your tombstone. Congratulations. I'm thrilled for you. Right? But does that have anything to do with music? It never has. It never has. It's a music industry conclave, so they can pass out trophies to the people who made the other guys the most money. I mean, come on. This is so so I just think that just having the clarity to sit there and go, I'm reminded of 1600s France. They're all of these people were absolute scumbags. Hey, fighting each other. So you don't sit there and go, oh, they're better people than me. No, they're not. They just had the bread or had the influence. And again, it's a social game. It has nothing to do with right or wrong here. And if you're a person who believes in doing right, you're not going to win with those guys. No, they're never going to like you. You actually have some principles. They couldn't stand that. That's anathema, right? So but I think the more you just do your thing, without worrying about, chasing this or chasing that. And in our discourse that, you just don't play games with those folks who, don't give them that kind of oxygen. And in the artistic sense, I think you have to be, you just can't be naive, I guess. I think that's the thing. I think you do probably better in a business sense by being pleasant and social and so forth. And, it reminds me of the old Muhammad Ali thing. He talked about, people said, you dislike white people. You won't. I goes, no, I don't dislike people. He goes, I'll deal with you. I'll do business with you. But I'm not so sure I trust you. Coming from Muhammad Ali, that struck me as a fair position. And I think that's some of what we need to be doing. You can go do business. You can go work out there and be social and work with people and sign contracts, do deals, and get your music out there and so forth. But know who the people who really are on the tribe. And if you're one of these people who's got Patreon account, if you've got actual fanhood, and so those are your people. That's the folks. Those are the folks you've got to really listen to. But the other people are just people you're doing business with. And there is allowed to be a distance there. Doesn't mean screw all your business partners. We're not suggesting that, but we are suggesting doing your thing on your terms and not letting someone else set the agenda about you're only part of the. If you have to do something to be part of somebody else's tribe, don't. You'll never really be accepted there anyhow. So it's kind of a waste of time. Much better to be the free agent, do your thing, be proactive, be affirmatively putting your voice in the world. So, yes, old French novels about older French history, the reading of French history, Matt Dillahunty being calm, thinking things through, the nature of our discourse online, what a mess that is, and maybe finally a way out of that conundrum of no matter what you do, you're wrong, being a bit more enforcing where it is you're right, and the things that you can say. And when you're in a position where you can't speak to that demographic, then you can't speak to that demographic. It's probably stay away from it. Is probably the best course, depending upon where you sit, in what community you're going to be perceived to be in. It just has to be handled, I think, with a little bit more sensitivity, a little bit more, instead of going in and go, no, we can all speak. No, we probably can't. So right now, it requires a more nuanced approach to all of this. And if we do that, then I think we can get the standard back to a better place. And I think by not trying to be part of anybody else's tribe, you do yourself enormous favors. For me, I don't feel like I have anything to prove anymore. I think one of the things that's been interesting in my musical world is, I have a tendency to, everyone's into this, or everyone's into that. You're in your back foot. You're getting a little, and sometimes I think you forget, wait a minute, I've seen all this before, and the arguments that people are making, a lot of cases, I've already seen them made and refuted successfully. I'm a bright enough person. I'm actually probably brighter than these people. Have a little self-confidence. You may very well be brighter than the people you may be arguing with. And you may be brighter than the people making, in my case, in the musical arguments. I think I sit there and I listen to some of the arguments being made by various people, and I'm sitting there going, wow, I've seen this show before. I do have a good musical education. I actually know a ton of stuff. I've got some fairly refined taste. I get to have an opinion too. And if I think a lot of it's BS, total BS, and I'm going to go in my own way, yeah, I can and should do that. And so all of this has, frankly, given me a bit more confidence. Sit there and go, you know what? I'm not trying to please. I'm coming from a position of, somewhat at least, a position of strength. More strength by saying, okay, this is the ground I'm planting my flag. These are the things I believe in. This is the kind of stuff I'm going to do. Well, it's not this, it's not that. That's right, it's not. I'm not trying to be part of someone else's scene. You know, you're not doing jazz. And if you do jazz, you're not doing it the right way. It's like all the music producer stuff. You've got to do it this way. You've got to do it that way. You've got to do it this way. I heard somebody the other day, and I was thrilled with the message, sitting there going, you know what? You can record with cheap equipment and make the music that's just fine. Because you can. You don't need all the stuff. You don't need all of the official, the laying on of hands by some cognoscenti to tell you that you're legitimate. You are legitimate. So do your thing. Make a joyful noise. Make your joyful noise. All right, that's what I got for you guys. Talk to y'all, I don't know, perhaps a week, something like that. Look at that. Alarms are going off. People love me. The whole thing's nuts. Talk to you guys soon.